friends, it's October, and you know what that means? Spooky season. But the catch to that is, I'm a big ol' scared cat, and I like light, mild, happy spooks, usually in the form of musicals. So this craft will not be scary per se, but maybe on theme? Sort of. While perusing through the Halloween decorations at Michael's Crafts, I came upon a empty dome that reminded me of a crystal ball, and I was like, "Hey, you know, it'd be kind of fun. Let's do a little mini scene in that crystal ball. Maybe like a little mini magical scene. Yeah, there's a magical scene, magical study even." And my brain at the thought of tiny miniature books was all the yes. I made a concept drawing of how I wanted this to look, but I do want to build this in Maya just with simple pieces to confirm layout and get an idea on the size and scale of each piece. Here are my goal measurements for each of the furniture items. We'll see how that actually plays out in reality, but we have a plan, and with a plan, we can start with construction. I made a silhouette of an armchair using a reference photo just to give us a bit of a cutting guide. I traced the shape onto some thin but sturdy cardboard and then cut it out 2 times using an X-Acto knife. Then I cut out the base of the seat, marking where the sides and the back of the chair will go. Free your new square of its cardboard prison, and let's move on to the backrest. Use any random round-ish object to draw the top curve, then more cutting. Punch it out and come to the realization that your measurements were all wrong, and do it again. Much better, but before we can glue all these pieces together, we need to give this chair some cushion. Using thin packing foam, I'm going to cut out tiny pieces for the backrest and the seat. Trim off any of the excess, and get ready for some miniature upholstery. I used a knit fabric I had lying around to make tiny little socks for the armchair sides. I did this over wrapping fabric around it because it was easier with the curves and both sides of the side are going to be visible. The backrest, however, I am just going to wrap fabric and glue it down. The messy side is going to be covered by a cushion that we're going to sew some fake cushion tufts into. Once the fake tufts are sewn, we're just going to glue down the backside and then glue the whole cushion onto the backrest. And it's basically the same for the seat cushion and the base, minus the cushion tufting. Then we'll glue on the seat to the exposed cardboard bit of the backrest, and the sides to the sides. Voila! Now we just need the feet. I'm going to cut some tiny legs from a paint stirrer, stain them with watered down paint, and then glue them on with little dabs of glue. Behold, a tiny chair for the tiniest of butts. Not quite sturdy, but for our purposes it has all the qualities we're looking for. Now, let's make a cauldron, shall we? Let's grab some firm Super Sculpey clay and cut out a long rectangle for the stone base. I used a painting knife to cut in grooves for the stone, and this nifty sculpting tool to widen those to make it look a little bit more realistic. I used a paper towel to give it some texture, and then this other nifty tool to give it some surface imperfections. For the cauldron, I flattened out some clay and then wrapped it around a ball stylus, removing any extra clay as needed. From there, I just keep wrapping, smushing, and cutting until we get a general cauldron-like shape. Added in a bit of detail, then made a hole at the bottom for a small LED. Looks pretty cute so far. Now we just add on some tiny handles, bake, and bring on the painting. We're going to give this gray clay a slightly different shade of gray. Next, I'll paint on some details, and then give it a bit of dry brushing just to bring out the edges. I'm super pleased with how this paint job turned out. And now that we have that done, we can give this cauldron something to brew. I made some test resin chips to pick the right color for a future potion, plugged the hole at the bottom with clay, and mixed together a magical resin concoction. Into the cauldron it goes. I'm gonna skip hitting this with a heat gun as I feel like microbubbles will give the liquid a sense of movement. Then we just wait for that to cure, and voila. A light test for fun, and huzzah! Cauldron accomplished. Now let's build a desk and bookshelf that'll make IKEA furniture look fun to put together. Starting with the bookshelf, we're going to cut out the back, the sides, and the shelves out of craft wood. Then we're going to give it a stain with watered down paint. Then, using the powers of glue and sanding, we're going to make something worthy to hold the tiniest of tomes. No Allen wrench needed. Referencing my goal measurements, I drew out the desk silhouette that I wanted, and cut out all the parts that you need to build a desk, at least a miniature one. After staining it in our usual fashion, we're going to roll some glue over it to put it together, paint on tiny little details, and we've crafted ourselves a desk. While they definitely won't get you an A in woodworking class, they'll work just fine for our project. Now let's book it over to the next part. In Photoshop, I made a page of book covers just using the stock shapes that you can find in the program. I made a selection with front graphics, and then I made some that were just a standard block of color. Some of these will be in the bookshelf and can't be seen anyway. Once we print and cut these out, then we can start on to the tiny bookmaking process. For these tiny covers, we're going to wrap them around stacks of paper, and the perfect stack of paper is the one that you're going to throw into the recycle. I grabbed a fan manual from a recent upgrade that I can always refer back to online if needed, and then I got it to where the edges of the paper are perfectly flush with each other. Clip it in place with binder clips, and then spread on a layer of tacky glue. Wait for it to dry, and let the wrapping begin. Before I glued the covers down, I went ahead and wrapped them over the paper so that they would get the appropriate creases and bends, and it would be easier for the actual gluing. And then I just put on tiny little dabs of glue and pressed them down. Now smother those books between paper and binder clips and wait for them to dry. And behold, the start of a new task. Summon your hand strength and sharp scissors and cut this out into a stick of books, and then your stick of books into stumps of books. Admire your progress so far, and then do it 30 more times. They're so cute. But for now, we're going to put them aside, and we'll see them again at assembly time. Let's move over to working on a light-up plant. And here it is. I did not record the making or the mold pour setup thing, so you get just a swirling shot of what baked clay looks like on unbaked clay inside of a weird container. Have fun. I'm going to try to do a 2-part mold so that I can cast some resin in it. This is a weird shape and I didn't want to break off any of its limbs, so this was a bit of an experiment. It worked. It was not graceful or reusable by any means, but I was able to get something I could use out of it. While we wait for the silicone to set, you can watch me completely fail at trying to get a cool shot with my camera. You ever have one of those days where you just forget to hit record? Anyway, part 1 is done. I'm just going to take my time to pry it out of this little lid thingy. And hey, it demolded itself, sort of. We just need to clean up some bits where clay got stuck in there and where the silicone flashing happened. I can just get these with an X-Acto knife. Again, this is not a pretty mold by any means, and the result is not pretty in itself, but it gets the job done, and that's what I'm looking for. I took this outside to apply some aluminite mold release, and then glued on broken toothpicks to use for putting in the sprue holes in our mold. You guys, I know this looks horrible. I didn't think out my container for doing the second part of the pour, so I just kind of like boop 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 on there with fingers crossed. And it works. It does not look great. It looks like an accident of silicone. Trust me, I know it looks bad, but it worked. It's not pretty and it's not perfect, but it did give us a usable object for our final setup. Next, just need to mix up a tiny batch of resin and put in our teal pigment. I'm going to put kind of a first layer, if you will, just directly into the first part so I could hit it with a heat gun and hopefully get out any tiny bubbles. And then I'll put on the top part and use the syringe to inject the rest of the resin. This came out a lot better than I was expecting considering the state of the mold. We did get imperfections, which are visible, but I don't think they'll be too distracting in the final piece, and a bit of flashing, but that's easy to remove. Let's go ahead and get this cleaned up and take it over to painting. I didn't do a whole lot with paint here. I just wanted to try to bring it down from its bright teal state, fresh from the resin, and make it look a little bit more natural, or as natural as I can get a resin plant to look with my skills. But we have that done. We're going to set that to the side, and we're going to sculpt some tiny details to throw about our scene. I ended up with a variety of things that we can spread throughout our scene to give it some life and detail. My favorites ended up being this cartoony skull and my attempt at a cat. It's got some ferret-like qualities, but we're not going to talk about that. What we are going to talk about is painting. Briefly, cue the transition shot. This is just a little sneak peek at some of the painted objects. I want to show them off in the final shots, so we'll see them in just a bit. Hey, you know what we need for this? A floor. I hear those are pretty great for rooms. I'm going to try my darndest to use this tool to make a nice circle, and then fail cutting out this smooth circle we just created. But it's nothing a little sandpaper can't fix down the road, so we're gonna roll with it. Now I'm just gonna mark out some floorboards and then give them some depth with my X-Acto knife and box cutting tool. Afterwards, I'm going to take this nifty little sculpting pick tool to widen those indentations and also to scuff up the floor a little bit. We're going to stain it with some watered down paint and then add some stains to the stain to make it look like this is a lived-in space. Oh, here's that aforementioned sandpaper. And look at that floor. We are slowly approaching the electrical section of this build, but before we can do that, we need to get some holes and things. The problem with that is my drill is nowhere to be found, and my rotary tool did not want to do the things. So using a nail, a hammer, and this nifty rasp tool, I was able to put holes in the desk and the floor that were wide enough for the LED. Now we just need to get the holes in the base as well. This is where things went not great. I put glue down to keep things aligned, which was a bad idea. Second off, the density of this base was such that the nail got stuck more easily than I was expecting. The fix for this is to use a drill. Just don't do anything you see here. Just point and laugh at it. Use a drill. An hour later, the nail was out and we were ready to keep on trucking. I used the rasp tool and a small file to make the hole a little bit wider to fit the wires. And that's one hole down, and one more to go. And so the cycle starts again. But not for you, thanks to the magic of editing. The second hole is in, and we're ready to clean this up and glue the floor on for real. One final wire check to make sure everything's gonna fit, and then we're going to move on to the electrical bits. Let's grab our tools and strip some wires. I'm going to set these up in my helping hands tool, making sure I'm keeping track of the positive side and the negative side of my battery pack. I'm going to go ahead and slip on some heat shrink tubing so that once we solder our two things together, the joint is protected. I'm going to use lead-free solder to pre-tin our wire, and I'll do the same on the battery pack once I get this wire tinned. Then we just solder the red wire to the positive side of our battery pack and the black to the negative. Hit it with a heat gun to shrink up that tubing and keep everything safe and snug. And you got a little battery pack with some noodle arms. Congrats. In case you haven't been able to pinpoint it yet, I am an extreme newbie to electronics and circuit making. I failed to plan out a reasonable amount of space for the switch I wanted to install, so I ended up having to take my first build apart and then redoing it to the circuit that you see on the screen. I thought it would be more helpful to fellow newbies to just see the final product instead of seeing bits and pieces of something being built that is going to be torn asunder again. Now that we have a circuit built, let's glue our furniture down. But before we can glue the shelf down, let's clutter it up with books and things. I'm going to use tweezers to arrange them into rows and stacks and leaning positions, and make sure that I leave room for our tiny little oddities that we're going to scatter about it. With the books in place, let's go ahead and put the final touches on the rest of our scene. While we go through these shots, I just want to take the time to say thank you. I am very new to the YouTubes and editing and voiceover work and a lot of the things you're going to see in this video and future videos, so I'm learning as I go, and I appreciate you being along for the ride. With our final details going in place, I'd say it's about time we roll over to the finished product. Thanks so much again for watching, and I will see you next time.